welcome to the Peer Support Podcast. Today's podcast is all about the stages of recovery and is presented to you by Rachel, that's me, Holly.
Hello everyone.
Andrea.
Hi everybody.
And we are all peer support workers who work within the Wellbeing Service. Today's podcast will cover a brief introduction as to what peer support workers are, what are the stages of recovery, and showing peer support workers' lived experiences of working through the stages of recovery. We hope that you come away from today's podcast with an understanding of what the stages of recovery are. So just to introduce peer support work, if you've not heard of this before. So peer support workers all have their own experience of living with mental health challenges, and we use our experience of this with others, along with our recovery stories, to offer hope. We use our experience of recovery to help people make sense of what they are going through and to explore what may support them in their own recovery. Recovery is a very personal thing and means different things for different people. Our podcast today will be showing peer support workers' experiences of moving through the stages of recovery, including what helped, the challenges that we have overcome, and what recovery looks like for us. So before we get into that discussion, I just thought I'd briefly cover what the stages of recovery are, and there's 5 different ones. The first one is the stage of being overwhelmed. It does exactly what it says on the tin, to be honest. This is at the point where everything is overwhelming and is a little bit too much. It might be the stage that you're experiencing some kind of mental health crisis as well. The second stage is about making sense of your experience and perhaps the crisis that you've just been having. Stage 3 is all about preparing to make changes. Stage 4 is about making changes, and stage 5 is about integrating the whole experience as we move forward through our recovery and into the rest of our lives. So, like I said, I'm joined today by Holly and Andrea, who are both peer support workers within the Wellbeing Service. And today's podcast is really going to be these two guys kind of sharing how these different stages looked for them. So we'll start with stage 1, which is the feeling of being overwhelmed and possibly at this point experiencing a crisis. So Andrea, do you mind if we start with you and how this might have looked for you when you were feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah. Well, when I was feeling overwhelmed, I was literally unable to do anything. Before feeling overwhelmed and in this stage, life for me was going to work 9 till 5, going out with my friends. I've had a 3-year-old son, so spending lots of time with him. But when this stage hit, I wasn't able to do any of that, and I spent most of my time literally in bed sleeping.
Okay, thank you. Holly, what about you? Is your experience of sort of feeling overwhelmed similar to Andrea's, or was yours a little bit different?
Very similar actually in a lot of ways. For me, it was a very difficult time. A lot of things had happened at once, as it quite often does in life. My nan had passed away. I'd just lost a job, and a few other things had happened all at the same time. But for me, also was this at this stage, I was completely overwhelmed, and all I could do was stay in bed and sleep was all I did at this stage. And the thought of doing anything else was just felt impossible, to be honest. And yeah, my answer to that was to sleep, to kind of, I suppose, cope with all the difficult feelings I was having at that time.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like you and Andrea, in that respect, had a similar response, to feeling sort of overwhelmed and those kind of feelings of, like you say, everything's just rather impossible and very difficult. And my experience would be the same, actually, that actually I just needed to opt out of the world for a bit. And that for me happened very much by putting the duvet over my head and pretending it didn't exist. And a difficult time to sort of be there. So the second sort of stage, once we've been in that sort of stage of, like we said, of feeling very overwhelmed and, things are feeling really quite dark, then the next stage is all about making sense of our experience and possibly that crisis that we've just been through. So Holly, if you don't mind, I'll kind of come to you first in this one. So how did that look like for you when you were kind of coming out of that, that overwhelmed stage and now starting to make sense of what was going on?
Yeah, I think for me at this stage, it was the realization that was hitting me that something wasn't right, and I didn't know exactly what or how to manage that. But I knew that I didn't want to stay in a dark place that I was in at that time. I think at that stage, I was slowly becoming aware that something wasn't right, and that changes needed to happen, but I wasn't yet ready to make those changes, or not. I wasn't even aware of what those changes might need to be. I was just aware that I was in a place that I didn't want to stay in.
Like you say, it's that feeling of, you might sort of have the sensation of being at a crossroads, or the feeling of, well, that overwhelmed stage was really difficult. That's a really difficult period of time that I've just come through, and I'm glad that I'm seeing the other side of it. But like you say, it's like, well, okay, something's not quite right here, something's not quite feeling as it should. I know that actually, this is not how I want to be, or how things, I was wanting them to be for me, but actually not knowing where that was going to take me, or, so I've understood that I've come through this, but I actually don't know the other side of it. What about you, Andrea? Would you kind of sort of say your sort of experience of making sense of things is similar to Holly's, or sort of different?
It's funny, because when Holly was speaking, it's almost like she took the words right out of my mouth. It's exactly how I felt. Before, when I was feeling very overwhelmed, I didn't have any interest in anything, and actually at this stage I still didn't have any interest in anything, but I had the sense that maybe I should be, so I hadn't been practicing any self-care, not brushing my teeth, not able to make myself a cup of tea, not spending any time with my son. But as Holly said, I knew that something had to change. It was also the time where I found myself in crisis. So knowing that things weren't right and something needed to change, but maybe that I couldn't, feeling that I wasn't a good enough mum, I wasn't a good enough wife, and had thoughts that maybe my family would be better off without me. So there was some of that at this stage as well.
Yeah, like you say, those kind of difficult feelings that can kind of follow us through, regardless of the fact that we've come through sort of the first stage, which I guess you could say is one of the hardest ones to come through, isn't it? When we're all kind of feeling sort of very overwhelmed. But yeah, like you said, still making sense of what I've just been through, what I am going through, but also sitting with those very difficult feelings of, actually, this is really hard, this is really difficult, and I've got these thoughts and feelings which, are quite difficult to kind of sit with, but also in a way are helping me to make sense of what I'm going through, in terms of, I'm really not been very well. I need to, like you say, look at self-care. I need to be looking after myself, but also, like Holly has said, in terms of, well, how do I do that? What's the next kind of stage? What's the next step? And, the next stage is really preparing to make changes. And Holly, it was interesting, you were saying about the previous stage where you were, understanding that things weren't quite right, but you really weren't ready to make any of those changes that you knew that you perhaps were needing to make. So for you, Holly, how did you know when you were ready to make changes? Was something that changed, or was it just sort of naturally through the course of time?
I think it was, to be honest, I think it was just through time. It happened organically, and I just remember talking a lot to a lot of different people, and going over and over and over things a lot as well. So the people that I was speaking to, I'm sure, must have felt like I sounded like a broken record, but nevertheless it was very important process that I needed to go through. I needed to talk through those feelings that I had, those very difficult feelings and thoughts that I had, in order to process what I was going through and to get through this very difficult period of my life. And not only did I do that, but I spent a lot of my time, rightly or whether it was helpful to me as I look back now, I'm not sure, but I did certainly spent a lot of time on the internet, Googling a lot of things, trying to make sense of how I was feeling and what I was experiencing, because I'm not a massive book person in terms of researching in that way, but of course the internet is very ready available to us.
Oh, it's so good, isn't it? 2:00 in the morning when you fancied a bit of, let's just find out a bit about this. And
absolutely,
yeah, like you say, Holly, hindsight's great, and when we look back and go, was that really the best thing for me to do? But we kind of do what feels right at the time, don't we?
Yes.
I mean, I know I spent a long time in this stage. I prepared to make changes for absolutely ages, and I was the queen of self-help books. So I would read them, make some notes, read another one, make some notes, read another one, make some notes. And that's kind of what I felt that I needed to do at that point, because it kind of took my focus off the previous stages. So when I was feeling overwhelmed, when I was feeling, I couldn't function, this for me made my brain kind of engage and sort of fizz, for want of a better expression, because I felt like I was taking charge. I felt like I was doing something. But like we've said, hindsight is great, and with hindsight, it's like, yeah, you spent a long time there, Rachel, and you got all of this information, which was great. Did you do anything with it? The answer to that was no. I had all these tips and tools and techniques, and just needed more and more. And I would have got to a point where actually, no, we need to do sort of something with this information. And Andrea, is your experience of preparing make changes sort of any kind of different to ours?
Yeah, very different. My preparing to make changes was kind of forced on me in a way, due to my family circumstances. So I'd been the one who'd gone out to work full time, but now because I couldn't work, we had no money coming in. So making changes for me was in terms of who's going to look after my son when my husband goes back to work. What do I need to do in terms of looking after the home, doing the housework? It would be me that would need to sort out things day to day. So as well as my mental health, there were very practical things that I needed to start looking at as well.
And like you've quite rightly said there, Andrea, our life experiences will shape this excuse me, as well, won't it? Like you said, if you're a wife and a mother, then actually you might be having to be preparing to make changes and make those changes a lot sooner than perhaps you were, perhaps wanting to, because your family circumstances were kind of dictating it. So this is really interesting, guys, because it kind of shows that yes, these recovery stages are 5 different stages that are quite kind of common as such, but we all experience them in a very different way. So like I've said, I prepared to make changes for, gosh, I don't even dare to think of how long I stayed here, but it's actually what I needed to do. It was the right thing for me to do at that point in time to prepare and make changes. And then eventually I could go into the 4th stage, which is making changes. So Andrew, if we stick with you, if that's okay. So you've kind of talked about how your preparation for these changes was perhaps shorter because of, your kind of family circumstances. What was it like, making changes when you were trying to put those things in practice?
Okay, it was difficult because like all of a sudden we'd got a date where my husband could go to work, and so it was then me kind of taking over everything, waving him off at 6:30, taking my son to nursery, being responsible for the food shopping, the day-to-day running of everything really, plus trying to fit in things for me personally making changes, you know, so maybe going to the beauticians and getting my nails done. I know that sounds extravagant, but self-care is something I'd not practiced for a very long time. Or maybe going out and getting breakfast with one of my friends. So it was the things I had to do for other people, as well as trying to make those changes for me. Get a little bit of exercise, you know, eat a little bit healthier. So a bit of a balance, really. I had other things to consider. Yeah,
and like you've said, you know, it's finding those things what helped, you know. So you've said, you know, going back to things that you would have previously done actually was helpful, you know, doing something really nice and pampering for yourself, getting your nails down, it was kind of helpful. And again, we kind of find our own ways here, don't we, in this stage, and how that kind of looks. And Holly, what about you when you were, you know, ready for making those changes? What did that feel like for you?
Yeah, so again, it was definitely a combination of things. You know, one of those things was seeking therapy for me. That was very important, and also being put on medication. That was right for me. But it was also very, very small things that made up the bigger picture. So I remember one particular time when I was walking through town, and I walked past the travel shop, and I used to do this thing where I would go into a travel shop and just look at travel magazines, because I love travel. It's one of my passions. And I would go into a travel shop and just look through travel magazines, even if I wasn't planning on going anywhere. And I remember that on this particular day, I went in to the travel shop for the first time in a really long time, and stood there looking through this travel book, and then suddenly I realized that was something I hadn't done in a really long time, because I hadn't had any interest or any energy to do that. And I think the fact that at that point I was doing that again was a good sign to me that I was coming out the other end and starting to feel a lot better.
And it's a different kind of change as well, isn't it? So like Andrea was saying, well, actually they're quite similar, having said that, in terms of, you know, Andrea's getting back to getting her nails done and going out for breakfast with her friends, and you're kind of looking at, well, I'm back in the travel agents, having a browse through the catalogues. Yep. How did that happen without me actually noticing it? And it's interesting, isn't it, how you know, some of these stages can, like we kind of say, naturally change and move into the next one without us actually being consciously kind of aware that we've started to make these change and do these things. And, you know, you kind of sort of mentioned sort of treatment, and it was this, you know, for me, it was finally stepping away from the pile of self-help books, move away from them, Rachel, take some of those ideas, do something with them. But also for me, it was accessing, you know, workshops through the Wellbeing Service, and, you know, taking in the information there, and, you know, sort of doing the home practice that they would set for us, and kind of make sort of different changes there. But also it was stuff like starting to do new things and things that perhaps I wouldn't have considered before. So I started to attend the Wellbeing socials, which terrified me. I can't lie, they did. But, you know, starting to go through those, and sort of trying sort of different kind of things there. And like you say, none of those changes have to be massive.
No, of course
they can
not.
be those small kind of changes that help us, and do sort of different things there. And again, we may stay at this stage for a longer period of time, because there's quite a few changes that need to be made, or they're all very sort of small ones that need to be done, but not all at once. You know, there can be the danger, can't they, of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and now I'm kind of going back into some of the other stages because I've kind of taken on too much again. So yeah, thank you both for that. So the final stage of the stages of recovery is all about taking all of these things that we have been through and all of those things that we have learned and kind of integrating them, really putting them all together and taking them forward, you know, with the rest of our lives. So Holly, I think I'll kind of sort of stick here with you and ask you, you know, what has this whole experience taught you and brought you in terms of the stuff that you've learned going through your own personal recovery?
So at this stage, you know, this was when it was very important stage for me. I got my own place. You know, that was a big part of my recovery, was moving into my own place, a place that I could call my own, that was my own space, and I could invite who I wanted into that space. That was really important. Getting this job was a big part of that as well. But I think ongoing, what I've learned is how important it is for me to make sure that I have things in my life that are important to me and that I'm passionate about. So making sure that I'm getting involved in my performing arts and making sure that I travel when I can, of course, and just making sure that I'm staying true to myself, and also knowing that I've been through that difficult period in my life. I've now got new skills and techniques that I didn't have before. So what that means is that I'm never going to go back. I can only move forward. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have a bad day or a bad week or even a bad month. But what it means is that I can move forward knowing that I have these tools and techniques to manage those difficult times. And I know myself so much better now. I know what I need. And what I don't need. Is knowing what you don't need is also very important.
It's equally as important, isn't it? Right? Yes. When you kind of go, well, I tried doing that didn't actually help, or when people do this, it doesn't help. And you know, you're quite right, Holly. We go through these stages of recovery. That's not to say that, you know, at some point we might sort of cycle back. You know, we might have to go back into making changes because actually we've learned something from, you know, the person that we're growing into, that, you know, we do need to make some tweaks, or we might need to prepare, and because something else has come up, you know, life has thrown us a curved ball and we need to sort of go back and, you know, learn some different things. But it's kind of like you said, always moving forwards, you know, even though sometimes that might be a bit sideways, or we might need to sort of stand still for a bit. You know, our recovery stories show us that we've been here, we've got stuff that we can use, we can sort of, like you say, sort of continually sort of move forward and grow. And Andrew, what about yourself? You know, so in terms of putting all the things together that your experience of recovery has kind of shown you.
Okay, well, much the same as the things that Holly said, Rachel. You know, for me, work was a massive part of this, being able to hold down a job again. And keeping things manageable, I suppose, is a big thing for me. Only doing things that I know are not going to push me over the edge. So, you know, do something. If I need to take small steps, take small steps. Don't overload myself. I think being around the right kind of people, being around supportive people, knowing that I can go to someone if I want to talk things through, sharing how I'm feeling, they're quite big things for me. And I've also worked out that exercise helps me a great deal as well, and healthy eating and the self-care. So doing a little bit of everything that I know keeps me well, really.
And for me, it's kind of looking back and, you know, not focusing on, oh dear, that was a terrible time of my life. And, you know, because, you know, I can't acknowledge, you know, that it wasn't, because it was horrible. But also knowing that I've been through that, I've come through it stronger. I've grown as a person, and it's given me some, you know, some interesting experiences, but also, you know, those kind of life tools and techniques that will actually, like Holly said, you know, when those wobbles come along, will help me to deal with them and manage them. And if I need to go through those stages again, then I'll go through those stages again. I've experienced them, and it's absolutely okay. And and I think we've kind of realised that whilst there are elements within our recovery journeys that are similar, there are also things that are quite different as well, isn't it, Andrea and Holly? And it's
absolutely,
kind of interesting how that kind of looks, and how we can stay at those stages for different sort of periods of time as well. So like we said, recovery is a journey, and it won't always be a straightforward pathway. Recovery is very personal to you. So in terms of today's podcast, we've looked at the stages of recovery, and Andrea and Holly have very kindly shared their peer support experience examples of going through those stages. So thank you guys for that today. Our next podcast will be looking at the importance of sharing stories and lived experience in recovery.
And you can find more information on recovery in today's podcast notes.
And if you're thinking, listening to this today, that you'd like to self-refer to the Wellbeing Service, you can do so via our website or over the telephone. And again, if you're currently having treatment within the Wellbeing Service and would like to have peer support, then please do speak to your therapist who can make the referral for you. So Andrea, myself and Holly would like to thank you for listening and for joining us this afternoon. Now we hope that you'll be able to join us again for our next podcast, which, like I say, will be on the importance of sharing stories and lived experience in recovery. So I'll say goodbye, and I'll let Andrea and Holly say goodbye as well.
Goodbye everybody, and thanks ever so much for listening.
Goodbye everyone, thank you so much for listening.